The restaurant was glowing that night, filled with soft golden lights that made every glass and surface shine. It wasn't the kind of place most people visited just for a meal. Every table had a small candle. The smell of roasted herbs drifted through the air and a quiet tune played from the corner speakers. The place spoke of quiet money and whispered deals. Outside, the city hummed. Cars glided by, people hurried along sidewalks, but inside everything slowed down. People spoke softly, laughed politely, and behaved like they were part of something important. Ethan Moore walked through the doors like he owned the place. In a way, he might as well have. He was the kind of man everyone noticed without meaning to. His suit looked like it had been made for him alone. His watch gleamed under the soft light, and he carried himself with a mix of confidence and impatience. People often said he was one of those self-made types. He liked the sound of that. He had been in the headlines before, business magazines, interviews, podcasts where he talked about the grind and vision. But what people didn't see was how much he loved the attention. He needed it. Success was his favorite mirror. He arrived that evening with a group of investors from abroad, men in dark suits and women in sharp blazers, each one carefully polite. They were there to talk about a possible deal with one of the city's luxury restaurant groups. Ethan had offered to host them. "Only the best for my guests," he had said earlier with a grin. When the maitre d' recognized him, he nearly stumbled over his words. Ethan gave a knowing smile. "A good table," he said. "Something private. You know how it is." Within moments, they were seated at a large table near the center of the room. It had a perfect view of the city skyline through the tall windows. The kind of table that told others, "These people matter." Ethan leaned back, loosening his tie slightly. "Gentlemen, ladies," he said, "you'll love this place. They're known for their service." The group nodded, flipping through the menus as conversation about markets and mergers started flowing. Then a soft voice interrupted. "Good evening. Welcome to Aurelia. My name's Clara, and I'll be your server tonight." Ethan didn't look up right away. He was in the middle of explaining a point about quarterly returns, and didn't like being interrupted. But when he finally glanced at her, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, then disbelief. It took him a second to place her. The soft brown hair tied neatly at the back. The calm, polite smile, the gentle tone. She looked familiar, though her presence was different, more grounded, more sure of herself. "Clara Evans," she said suddenly, reading the look on his face. "It's been a long time, Ethan." There it was. The name. Clara. For a second, the air around their table shifted. Ethan's guests noticed the change. He blinked, tilted his head, and let out a short laugh. "Well," he said slowly, "look at that. Clara Evans, from high school, right?" She nodded, still smiling politely. "That's right," he laughed again, louder this time. "Wow. Never thought I'd see you here. Guess it's true what they say. The world's small." The guests smiled politely, unsure what was happening. Clara's expression didn't change. "It is," she said. "I hope you've been doing well." "Oh, can't complain," he said with a smirk. "You know how it goes, long days, big dreams, and all that." She gave a small nod, then asked, "Would you like to start with something to drink?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, still half grinning. Sure. You tell me, what's good here? I'm guessing you'd know all the favorites by now." Her tone stayed professional. "We have a new selection of wines that pairs well with our menu. Would you like me to bring a few options?" "Of course. You pick." He chuckled again, then glanced at his guests. "Clara and I go way back. We were in the same class, weren't we?" "Yes," she said. "I remember," he smirked. "You used to sit in front, right? Always reading something." "Sometimes," she said simply. "Oh, come on," he said, laughing. "You were the quiet one. Always had your nose in a book. Didn't think I'd run into you again, especially not here." Clara didn't answer that. She just gave a polite smile, took their drink orders, and walked away. As soon as she was gone, Ethan leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough for the group to hear. "You see? I told you. You never know where people end up." She was this shy girl in school, smart but invisible. I guess life takes people in different directions. A couple of his guests gave small laughs, the kind meant to stay polite. One of them said, "It's nice that she remembered you." "Oh, trust me," Ethan said with a grin. "Everyone remembers me." When Clara returned with the drinks, She moved with calm precision. Her steps were quiet, her hands steady. Ethan watched her, almost amused by how composed she was. "So, Clara," he said, leaning slightly forward. "You been working here long?" "Long enough," she replied, setting a glass in front of him. He raised his eyebrow. "Not bad. Must be tough, though. All these hours on your feet." She smiled again. "It's not so bad. I like what I do." "That's good," he said, his tone carrying a hint of disbelief. "As long as you're happy." She gave a small nod and walked off again, leaving them with their menus. The conversation at the table moved back to business, but Ethan kept glancing at her. Something about the situation amused him. It made him feel powerful. In his mind, he saw the shy girl from years ago, sitting alone at lunch, walking home with her head down, carrying second-hand books. He had been the loud one, the popular one. Things hadn't changed much, it seemed. When Clara returned with their appetizers, the group complimented the presentation. She thanked them warmly, describing each dish briefly. Ethan interrupted halfway through. "Hey, do you still live around here?" he asked suddenly. She looked at him for a moment, then said, "Sometimes. I travel a bit for work." "Oh? Waitress by day, traveler by night?" he said with a grin. The table gave a few polite laughs. Clara didn't flinch. "Something like that," she said softly, then turned her attention back to the group. "Please enjoy your meal," she said, then walked away again. Ethan took a sip of his wine, satisfied. "You see," he told his guests, "that's what I love about life. You climb the ladder, you make it big, and sometimes you meet people who remind you where you started. Keeps you humble, right?" They nodded, though one of them gave a small, uneasy smile. Half an hour later, the main dishes arrived. The food looked exquisite, and even Ethan had to admit it was one of the best meals he'd had in a while. But the more he drank, the looser his tongue became. "So, Clara," he said again when she came to check on them, "tell me something. Remember that old teacher, Mr. Lang? The one who always said you'd go far?" "Yes," she said quietly. He laughed. "Guess he was right, huh? You did go far, right into fine dining." The table went silent for a second. One of the investors shifted uncomfortably. Clara met Ethan's eyes, calm but unreadable. "I'm sure he'd be proud of both of us," she said simply. Ethan laughed again, waving his hand. Of course. You were always polite. Some things never change," she smiled lightly, "and some do." With that, she turned and left once more. For a moment, Ethan just watched her walk away, feeling a small flicker of irritation he couldn't quite name. Something about her composure bothered him. She wasn't flustered. She wasn't angry. She was just calm, almost as if she knew something he didn't. The dinner went on, filled with laughter, business talk, and the occasional clinking of glasses. But every so often, Clara would pass by, checking on another table, speaking to another guest, always professional, always collected. And every time she did, Ethan felt the faint sting of her quiet confidence. Later, when dessert came, Ethan leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying himself. "You know," he said loudly, "I should probably leave a big tip tonight. Maybe even enough to make up for the old days." Clara didn't respond. She simply placed the dessert plates down and asked, "Would you like coffee with that?" "Sure," he said. "Black, like old times, right? Remember the school cafeteria coffee?" "Terrible stuff, and I remember," she said softly, then walked away again. When she was gone, one of the guests, a middle-aged man with graying hair, leaned closer to Ethan. "She seems like a good person," he said quietly. "You shouldn't tease her too much," Ethan shrugged. "It's just talk. Come on, we're all friends here. Besides, she's probably used to it. People who serve the public get all kinds." The man didn't respond, but his eyes said plenty. As the evening went on, Ethan grew louder, telling more stories about his rise, how he started small, worked hard, and ended up building a business empire. He loved the sound of his own voice. The investors nodded, smiled, and drank. The city lights outside shimmered against the windows. When Clara returned with the check, Ethan took it with a smirk. "Don't worry, I've got this," he said, sliding his card inside. "It's not every day I get to help out an old classmate." She didn't react. She simply said, "Thank you, sir," and took the folder away. The table chuckled a little nervously this time. Ethan thought he was being generous, but something about the moment felt off. He couldn't quite figure out why. Maybe it was the way Clara had looked at him. Not angry, not hurt, just knowing. When she returned, he signed the receipt with a flourish, leaving a large tip. "Here," he said, handing her the slip. "For old times' sake. Buy yourself something nice." Clara took the receipt and gave a small smile. "That's kind of you," she said. "I appreciate it." Then as she gathered the plates, she added quietly, "I'm sure we'll see each other again before the night ends." Ethan chuckled. "Oh yeah? Planning to join the party upstairs?" She just smiled, gave a polite nod to the table, and walked away. As she disappeared into the kitchen, one of the guests asked, "What did she mean by that?" Ethan waved his hand dismissively. "Who knows? Probably just talk. You know how people are, trying to sound mysterious. Anyway, let's get to the real reason we're here." He leaned forward, eager to start discussing the deal that would, in his mind, seal another victory for him. The night was still young, and he was feeling untouchable. Outside, the city glowed brighter. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with the quiet rhythm of expensive conversations and clinking glasses. Somewhere in the background, Clara watched the table for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she turned away, her steps steady and sure. For Ethan, it was just another dinner. For Clara, it was the beginning of something else entirely, something he would never see coming. The dinner was over, but the night wasn't. Ethan and his group were still seated, talking and laughing as if they owned the place. The plates were cleared, and the wine glasses were half empty, leaving faint red circles on the white tablecloth. The sound of quiet music floated through the air. The investors seemed pleased. They liked Ethan's charm, his confidence, and his stories. Everything about him screamed success. He leaned back in his chair, completely at ease, swirling what was left of his wine. "You know," one of them said with a slight accent, "this place is wonderful, very professional staff." Ethan smiled proudly as if he had something to do with it. "I told you," he said. "Only the best. I make it a point to know good places. Connections are everything in business," another laughed. "And you even knew the waitress." That made Ethan grin wider. "Yeah," he said. "Small world, right? We went to school together. Back then, no one would have guessed how things would turn out. I was always a dreamer, a risk-taker." She was quiet, nice, but you know the type. Head down, books open, no spark. He chuckled softly, remembering how it used to be. She always said she wanted to make a difference. Guess she did, in her own way. One of the guests smiled politely, but another one, a woman in a navy blue blazer, frowned a little. "You speak about her like you know her story," she said softly. Ethan shrugged. "I don't have to. You can tell a lot from a person's choices." She didn't respond. Instead, she looked around the restaurant, where Clara was now serving another table with the same calm grace as before. She seemed unbothered, almost peaceful. When Clara passed by their table again, Ethan raised his hand slightly. "Hey, Clara," he called out, smiling like an old friend who had just remembered something funny. She turned politely. "Yes? Do you remember those school days?" he asked, loud enough for his whole table to hear. "You used to sit in the library all the time reading. What was it you wanted to be again? A teacher? A writer?" Clara looked at him, her eyes calm. "A leader," she said simply. Ethan laughed, genuinely surprised by the answer. "A leader, huh? That's a good one. I guess we all have dreams." The table laughed lightly with him, though a few people looked uncomfortable. Clara didn't say anything else. She just smiled gently as if she'd heard something like that 100 times before. "Would you like me to bring anything else?" she asked, her tone even. "Maybe just another bottle," Ethan said. "We're celebrating success tonight. You know, Clara, success comes from hard work, not just serving it." One of the guests shifted in his seat, whispering something that Ethan ignored. Clara simply nodded and walked away, her posture as straight and graceful as ever. As soon as she was gone, Ethan said, "You see? Some people never understand how to climb up. You have to want more. You have to be hungry for it." The man beside him gave a small smile. Maybe her goals were different, Ethan smirked. Maybe, or maybe she just didn't have what it takes. There was an awkward silence. Then one of the guests quickly changed the subject, steering the conversation back to business. 15 minutes later, Clara returned with the bottle of wine. She poured it carefully, her movements smooth, her eyes steady. Ethan watched her the entire time as if waiting for a reaction. When she finished, he said lightly, "I have to say you've got patience. I'd go crazy dealing with demanding people every day. Clara gave a soft smile. It's easy when you love what you do, he laughed. You really do, huh? That's good. Keep that attitude. It might take you far someday. She nodded politely and began to leave, but he spoke again. Hey, Clara, wait, she stopped. Yes? Tell me, he said, leaning forward slightly, his tone almost teasing. Do you ever regret not aiming higher? You were always smart. Didn't you want more than this? He gestured vaguely at her uniform. Clara's face stayed calm, but her voice carried quiet strength. Everyone's journey is different, she said. Sometimes what looks small from the outside is much bigger than people think. Ethan raised his eyebrows. That sounds deep. It's true, she said. Not everything is as it seems. He smiled, trying to sound playful. Well, maybe one day I'll come back and see you running this place. She looked at him for a long second before saying softly, Maybe you will. Then she turned and walked away again, leaving the group quiet. One of the investors leaned closer to Ethan and said quietly, You shouldn't talk like that. It's not good manners, Ethan waved him off. Relax, we're just having fun. She's not offended, but deep down a part of him wasn't so sure. Something about Clara's calmness made him uneasy. It was like no matter what he said, she wasn't affected. She didn't blush, didn't fumble, didn't try to please him. She was too steady, too sure. And that bothered him. He didn't realize that others around them, other diners, the staff, even his own guests, had started noticing his tone. The laughter at his table had grown thinner, the air a little heavier. But Ethan was too wrapped up in his own pride to care. An hour passed and the restaurant began to empty. The lights dimmed slightly and the background music softened. Ethan's group finished their drinks and began to stand. Clara returned to clear their table, her movements as graceful as when she'd started her shift. Thank you for dining with us, she said, her smile kind and professional. Ethan looked at her, still holding on to that half grin that had never left his face. You know, he said, I almost didn't recognize you tonight. You cleaned up well. Back in school, you always looked so ordinary. Clara froze for a brief second, not in shock, but as if she was carefully choosing her next move. Then she simply smiled again. I'm glad to see you've changed too, she said softly. In some ways. He blinked, unsure what she meant. Before he could respond, she continued, I wish you a pleasant evening, Ethan, and good luck with your meeting upstairs. That caught his attention. Meeting upstairs? Yes, she said. Your guests mentioned you had a business appointment with our management team. They're expecting you in about 10 minutes. Ethan nodded, regaining his swagger. Ah, right. The deal. Yes, important stuff. She gave a polite nod. Then I'll let them know you'll be joining them shortly. Sure, he said. Tell them the man of the hour is on his way. She smiled. I think they already know. And with that, she turned and disappeared into the back of the restaurant. Ethan watched her go, a faint smirk still playing on his lips. Strange woman, he muttered. Still so serious. The guests gathered their things. A few of them were quiet. Others murmured about the upcoming deal. As they made their way upstairs, Ethan straightened his tie and brushed imaginary dust from his sleeve. Let's get this done, he said. Time to close another win. They followed a hostess up a set of elegant stairs that led to a private conference room overlooking the city. The air there was different, cleaner, more formal. The room had a long, polished table, soft leather chairs, and a tray of refreshments waiting. The investors took their seats. Ethan stood near the window, admiring the view. I love this city, he said. Every building, every light. It reminds you how far you can go when you push yourself. The others nodded politely, checking their phones or notes. A few minutes passed and the room remained empty except for them. Ethan frowned slightly. Strange, he said. I thought someone would be here already. Then the door opened, everyone turned their heads, and there she was. Clara stepped into the room, no longer wearing her uniform. Her hair was neatly styled, her makeup subtle but elegant, and her outfit was a tailored suit that fit her perfectly. Her expression was calm, but her presence filled the room instantly. Ethan's smile faded. For a moment he just stared, completely thrown off. Good evening, she said, walking toward the table. I hope you all had a pleasant meal. One of the investors stood quickly, greeting her with respect. Ms. Evans, it's an honor to meet you again. Ethan turned sharply. Ms. Evans? Clara smiled faintly. Yes, she said, turning to face him. Clara Evans, Director of Operations for the Aurelia Group. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through glass. Ethan blinked. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The other guests looked at each other, uncomfortable. Clara continued, her tone calm and professional. I oversee all of our restaurant branches, including this one. Tonight's dinner was part of our hospitality evaluation before moving forward with the partnership. One of the investors cleared his throat. Ah, yes. We were told someone from management would observe the evening. We didn't realize it would be you. I prefer to see things for myself, Clara said softly. Then turning to Ethan, she added, It helps me understand the people we might work with. Ethan's throat went dry. You're the director? Yes, she said, meeting his eyes. Surprised? He forced a shaky laugh. Well, I didn't know. You were a waitress? She finished for him. Her tone wasn't angry. It was calm, almost gentle. Sometimes it's useful to see how people behave when they think no one important is watching. Ethan's face burned. The words hit harder than any insult could. She turned to the others, completely composed. Please, let's begin the meeting. As she spoke, Ethan tried to compose himself, sitting down quickly. His confidence was gone, replaced by an awkward stiffness. Every time he looked at Clara, he saw not the quiet girl from school, not the waitress he thought he'd humiliated, but a woman in control, elegant and untouchable. And for the first time that night, he had nothing clever to say. The meeting began, with Clara leading it smoothly, explaining business strategies, growth plans, and operational strengths. Her voice was steady, her posture perfect. She was everything he had pretended to be, confident, respected, and undeniably powerful. Ethan could barely focus. Each word reminded him how foolish he'd been. His earlier jokes echoed in his head, each one sounding smaller and pettier now. When the discussion ended, Clara stood and said, Thank you for your time. We'll review the details and reach out once we've made a decision. She smiled politely at everyone. Everyone except him. Ethan stayed seated, his palms sweaty, his mind racing. As she turned to leave, she paused for just a second and said quietly, It was nice to see you again. Ethan, some things really do change. Then she walked out, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. Ethan sat there in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His guests avoided his eyes. No one said a word. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan Moore didn't feel like a success. He felt small. The room stayed quiet long after Clara left. The only sound was the faint hum of the city below, mixed with the soft ticking of a clock on the wall. Ethan sat there frozen, staring at the door she had walked through. He couldn't think straight. His mind replayed every moment from dinner, every joke he had made, every word that had left his mouth without thought. He could hear his own laughter in his head, cruel and careless. And then her voice, calm, strong, and unshaken, cutting through it all, Director of Operations. The words felt heavy, almost unreal. The investors exchanged uneasy glances, trying to figure out what to say. Finally, one of them, the older man with gray hair, cleared his throat gently. Well, he said, that was unexpected. Ethan forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Yeah, he said weakly. You could say that. No one spoke after that. They quietly began gathering their papers, giving polite nods before leaving one by one. Nobody wanted to make eye contact with him. They all knew what had just happened. The powerful man in the expensive suit had just embarrassed himself in front of someone far more powerful. When the room finally emptied, Ethan stayed seated, staring out the window. The city lights below flickered like tiny fires, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel taller than them. He felt small, smaller than he ever had before. He rubbed his temples, trying to calm himself. She played me, he muttered under his breath. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. She hadn't played him at all. She hadn't lied, hadn't mocked, hadn't even raised her voice. Everything she'd said had been polite, professional, kind. It was him. He'd humiliated himself without her needing to lift a finger. He sat there a little longer, his reflection faintly visible in the glass. For once, he didn't like what he saw. The man staring back at him looked proud, empty, and tired. When he finally left the room, the restaurant was almost closed. The lights were dimmer now, and most of the staff had gone home. He could still hear quiet voices from the kitchen, People cleaning up, laughing softly, talking about their day. As he passed by, one of the waiters nodded politely. "Have a good night, sir." He nodded back without a word, heading toward the door. But before he reached it, he heard another voice behind him. "Ethan," he turned. Clara stood a few feet away, now holding a folder in one hand. She had changed out of her suit jacket, but still looked composed. Her calm presence filled the space between them. He didn't know what to say. He forced an awkward smile. "Clara, I didn't realize that I was the director?" She finished for him gently. He nodded, embarrassed. "Yeah, you really caught me off guard there." She smiled faintly. "That wasn't my plan. I was supposed to attend the dinner later, but I wanted to see how the evening went from the floor. I like to understand my guests and staff better that way." He swallowed hard. "Right, makes sense." For a moment there was silence between them. The air felt heavy, not with anger, but with everything unspoken. Ethan finally said, "Look, about earlier. I might have said things that didn't come out right." Clara tilted her head slightly. "Didn't come out right or weren't right to begin with?" He blinked. Her tone wasn't harsh, it was just honest. That made it worse somehow. He sighed, looking down. "You're right. I was out of line. I was trying to... I don't even know. Impress people, I guess." She nodded slowly. "I understand. It happens more often than you'd think." He frowned. "Still, I shouldn't have treated you like that. You didn't deserve it." Clara looked at him quietly for a moment before replying. "I wasn't upset, Ethan. But I did see something tonight. Something that reminded me why we choose who we work with carefully." His chest tightened. "So what does that mean for the deal?" "It means," she said softly, "that respect matters as much as success." Maybe even more. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Clara continued, her voice calm but clear. "You've built something impressive, Ethan. You've worked hard, I can tell. But somewhere along the way, I think you forgot what it's like to look at people and see more than their roles." He stared at her. Words caught in his throat. "You saw a waitress tonight," she said. "Not a person. Not a professional. Just someone beneath you. That's what you showed your investors too." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, unable to meet her eyes. "You're right," he said quietly. "I did." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she walked closer, stopping just a few feet away. "You know, I remember you from school," she said. "You were confident. You always had this energy, like you were meant to do something big. I admired that once." He looked up at her. "You did?" She smiled faintly. "Of course, but confidence and kindness are supposed to grow together. If one outgrows the other, the balance is lost." Her words sank deep, sharper than any scolding could be. "I'm not saying this to humiliate you," she added gently. "I don't believe in that. I'm saying it because I hope you remember it." He nodded slowly, his voice low. "I will." Clara looked at him for another moment, then opened her folder. "The board will review the partnership tomorrow. We'll make our final decision then." "Please," he said, almost pleading, "don't let my behavior ruin the deal. My team," she held up a hand. "It's not about punishment. It's about alignment. If your company can show integrity, respect, and growth, then maybe there's still a path forward. But that has to start with you." He swallowed hard. "Understood." "Good," she said softly. They stood there in silence for a few moments. The restaurant was nearly empty now, and the faint clinking from the kitchen was the only sound. Finally, Clara took a step back. "It's late," she said. "You should get some rest." He nodded. "Yeah." As she turned to leave, he called out, "Clara?" She paused, glancing over her shoulder. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not, tearing me apart in front of everyone." "You could have." She gave a small smile. "I didn't need to. Sometimes silence teaches louder than words." And with that, she walked away, her calm footsteps fading down the hallway. Ethan stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space she'd left behind. The silence felt heavy, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't try to fill it. When he finally stepped outside, the night air was cool and quiet. The city had settled into its late rhythm. Lights glowing in windows, cars passing in the distance, a soft wind carrying the scent of rain. He stood on the sidewalk, breathing it in. He thought about his life, the awards, the applause, the articles calling him visionary. And suddenly, all of it felt hollow. What good was success if it came at the cost of forgetting how to treat people with respect? He remembered the first days after high school, how hungry he'd been to prove himself, He'd worked long hours, built contacts, studied deals, sacrificed sleep. But somewhere between the meetings and the money, he'd built walls instead of bridges. That night, for the first time, he didn't drive home in silence. He turned off the radio, rolled down the windows, and let the night air in. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was something close to awareness. The next morning, he woke up early. There were messages from his team asking about the deal. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat at his desk looking at the framed photos. Business milestones, newspaper features, smiling faces at grand openings. He realized none of them showed the people who had helped him get there. The assistants, the workers, the ones he'd never remembered to thank. He sat there for a long while thinking about Clara's words. Confidence and kindness should grow together. That day he called his office early. "Cancel my morning meetings," he said. "I have something important to take care of." A few hours later, he was back at the restaurant. The morning light poured through the windows, giving everything a softer glow. The staff were setting up tables, preparing for the day. When they saw him, some looked surprised, others cautious. He gave them a small, polite nod, not the commanding kind he used to give, but one that actually meant good morning. He asked for Clara. The manager said she was upstairs in a meeting. He waited. When she came down, she looked surprised to see him, but didn't seem annoyed. "Ethan," she said, "you're back." "Yes," he said. "I wanted to apologize. Properly this time." She studied him quietly for a moment. "You already did last night." "Not like this," he said. "Last night I was embarrassed. Now I understand." Clara crossed her arms lightly. "What do you understand?" He took a deep breath. "That I forgot how to treat people with respect, that I let pride run my mouth, and that success doesn't make me better than anyone. It only means I had help I didn't always see." She looked at him for a long moment, her expression softening. He continued, "I'm not asking for your forgiveness or for the deal. I just wanted to say thank you for reminding me what matters." Clara nodded slowly. "That's good to hear, Ethan. I appreciate that." He smiled faintly. "And if the board decides not to move forward, I'll understand. But if they do, I promise, things will be different." She didn't answer right away. Finally, she said, "Actions speak louder than words. Let's see what time shows." He nodded. "Fair enough." She extended her hand. "Then let's start fresh, as professionals." He shook it, his grip steady but humble. "Agreed." As he turned to leave, she said, "Ethan?" He looked back. "Everyone stumbles," she said softly, "but not everyone learns. Don't waste what this moment is trying to teach you." He smiled, a real one this time. "I won't." When he walked out into the daylight, something inside him felt lighter. It wasn't victory or relief. It was something simpler, something cleaner. A sense that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to change. That evening, he sent a message to his entire team. It wasn't about profits or deadlines, it was about gratitude. He thanked everyone, from executives to office staff, for their work, their patience, and their belief in the company. It was the first time he'd done that in years. As he pressed send, he thought of Clara again. The quiet strength in her eyes, the calm tone in her voice, the lesson she had taught him without ever raising her voice. Sometimes life doesn't teach through lectures or punishments. Sometimes it teaches through people who hold up a mirror and make you see who you've become. And Ethan, for the first time in his adult life, didn't turn away from the reflection. He faced it. The morning of the board meeting arrived quietly but heavy. The air outside Ethan's apartment was gray and cool, with a faint drizzle painting the streets below. He stood by the window for a long while, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. He hadn't slept much. His mind had been turning, over and over what Clara had said the night before. Respect matters as much as success. He'd spent most of his life believing results were everything, that if the numbers looked good, people would look past how you got them. But now, for the first time, he wasn't so sure. He set the cup down, straightened his tie, and took a deep breath. Today wasn't just another meeting, it was a test, not of his company but of himself. The office building where the meeting would be held was sleek and tall, all glass and silver. As Ethan walked through the lobby, people nodded and smiled like they always did, but it felt different today. He didn't just nod back mechanically. He made eye contact, said good morning, actually meant it. He reached the top floor and was greeted by his assistant, who looked nervous. "The board's already gathering," she said. "Clara's there too." He nodded. "Thank you." Inside the conference room, everyone was seated around a long table, polished wood, cold light overhead. Clara sat near the center, calm and composed as always. When their eyes met, she gave a polite nod. Ethan returned it, though his heart was beating faster than he wanted to admit. The chairperson began the meeting with the usual introductions and summaries. Then it was time for Ethan to present. He stood up, laptop open, and looked at the slides he'd prepared. They were full of numbers, charts, and projections, all the usual business details. But as he stared at them, something inside him shifted. He closed the laptop. "Before I start," he said, "I want to say something a little different today." Everyone looked up, curious. Clara's expression stayed calm, but there was a faint glimmer of interest in her eyes. "I came here expecting to talk about profits and growth," Ethan continued. "But after last night I realized something. Growth isn't only about money, it's about people, it's about trust. And lately, I've been forgetting that." The room stayed quiet. He could feel every eye on him, but he didn't flinch. He went on. "Last night I said some things that I regret. Not in this room, but at dinner. I let pride speak louder than respect. I judged someone before I even knew who they were. And I was wrong." He paused. His voice stayed calm, but it was sincere. "I've spent years chasing success. I thought being at the top meant being untouchable. But the truth is, I was missing something more important. Humility. Without that, success doesn't mean much." One of the older board members leaned back, arms crossed, clearly surprised. Ethan continued anyway. "If this partnership moves forward, I don't want it to just be about profit. I want it to be built on respect, between every person who touches it. From the boardroom to the restaurant floor. Because without that foundation, nothing we build will last." He took a slow breath. "That's all I wanted to say." When he finished, silence filled the room. He could hear the faint buzz of the projector and the soft hum of the air conditioner. No one spoke right away. Finally, Clara leaned forward slightly. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were softer than before. "Thank you, Ethan," she said. "That was unexpected." He gave a faint smile. "I've had a lot to think about lately." The chairperson nodded thoughtfully. "We'll take some time to discuss the proposal privately," he said. "You can wait outside for now." Ethan nodded and left the room quietly. He sat down in the waiting area, heart pounding. He didn't know what the outcome would be. A week ago, he would have been terrified about losing the deal. But now, strangely, he wasn't thinking about that. He just wanted to leave the right impression, to show that he'd learned something real. The minutes stretched into nearly an hour. He watched the rain tap against the window, each drop sliding down slowly. His reflection in the glass looked different, calmer, maybe even lighter. Finally, the door opened. Clara stepped out first, followed by the others. She walked toward him, her expression composed. "The board has made its decision," she said. He stood, trying to read her face, but she gave nothing away. "We've decided to move forward with your company," she said at last. For a second, Ethan didn't believe what he'd heard. "Really?" She nodded. "Yes, the board believes in the potential of your project and in your willingness to grow." He exhaled, almost in disbelief. "Thank you, Clara. I won't let you down." Clara smiled faintly. "We'll hold you to that." There was no dramatic applause, no sudden cheer, just a quiet moment of respect between two people who finally understood each other. When the meeting ended, Clara lingered as the others left. She approached him and said softly, "That took courage." admitting what you did in front of everyone. He nodded. It took your honesty to get me there. She gave a small smile. Sometimes people just need a mirror. You looked at yours. He chuckled softly. Didn't like what I saw at first. Most of us don't, she said. But that's how we change. He looked at her for a moment and said, You know, I used to think humility made people weak. Now I see it's the hardest thing in the world to have. Clara nodded thoughtfully. It is, but it's also what keeps people human. That day marked the start of something new. Not just a partnership between two companies, but a slow rebuilding of character. Over the next few weeks, Ethan made small but meaningful changes. He started visiting his offices more often, not to check on numbers, but to talk to people. He learned the names of the receptionists, the janitors, the kitchen staff. He asked about their families, their weekends, their goals. At first, people were surprised. Some even thought he was joking. But when they saw he meant it, things began to shift. Meetings became more open. Ideas started coming from people who'd once been too afraid to speak up. The energy in the company changed. He didn't become perfect overnight. No one does. He still had his old habits, moments when pride tried to creep back in. But every time it did, he remembered that night in the restaurant, the look in Clara's eyes, and the quiet way she had taught him a lesson he'd never forget. One afternoon, a few weeks later, Clara came by his office for a follow-up meeting. As she entered, he greeted her with a warm smile. Good to see you, Clara. You too, she said. She looked around, noticing small changes. A bulletin, board filled with employee appreciation notes, a suggestion box that wasn't just for show, and a few staff members laughing near the break room. I see you've been busy, she said with a smile. He nodded, trying to make things better. Turns out when people feel seen, they do their best work. That's true, she said. Leadership starts with listening. They sat down to go over project details, but the conversation drifted easily into life, memories and lessons learned. At one point, Ethan asked, Do you ever think about how different things could have gone if you hadn't said anything that night? Clara thought for a moment. I do, but I think you needed that moment more than the deal itself. Life has a strange way of teaching us what we need, even when it hurts. He nodded slowly. Yeah, I think you're right. There was a brief pause before he said, You know, I never asked what made you decide to start working at that restaurant in the first place. You're a director. You didn't have to. Clara smiled softly. I like to stay connected. When you work at the top for too long, you start losing sight of how the ground feels. Spending a day on the floor reminds me of the people who make everything possible. He nodded, impressed. That's actually really smart. It's just human, she said. We all start somewhere. I started as a hostess at a small diner. The owner there treated everyone like family, no matter their role. I never forgot that. Ethan looked down thoughtfully. I wish I'd learned that earlier. It's never too late, she said kindly. After their meeting, as Clara got ready to leave, she paused at the door. Ethan, she said, keep this version of yourself. The world needs more leaders like that, he smiled. I'll try. Don't try, she said gently. Just remember. When she left, he sat back in his chair and let her words sink in. Just remember. Simple but powerful. Over the next few months, the partnership between their companies flourished. Not because of aggressive marketing or big money moves, but because the culture changed. People respected each other more. Communication improved, projects ran smoother, and every now and then Ethan would visit the same restaurant again, not to show off, but just to eat, chat with the staff, and appreciate the work they did. Clara was often there too, greeting employees, checking details, smiling at little things most people overlooked. One evening, as they stood near the window looking out at the city lights, Ethan said quietly, You know, this view used to make me feel powerful. Now it just makes me feel grateful. Clara smiled. That's how you know you've grown. He nodded slowly. I think I finally understand what real success looks like. It's not about who stands higher. It's about who helps others stand with them. Clara looked at him for a moment and said softly, That's something no business book will ever teach. They shared a quiet smile, one built not on competition or status, but on mutual respect, the kind that can only come from truth. Later that night, As Ethan left the restaurant, he glanced back through the window. He saw Clara talking with a group of young servers, laughing, giving advice, encouraging them. And he realized she wasn't just a director, she was a leader in the truest sense. He walked out into the night feeling a peace he hadn't felt in years. The city lights didn't seem like trophies anymore. They looked like stars, small reminders that everyone shines in their own way. The rain had stopped, and the air was clear. As he crossed the street, a soft smile formed on his face. For once, he didn't feel like the billionaire with all the answers. He just felt human, and that, he thought, was worth more than all the money in the world. Months had passed since the partnership began, and the change in Ethan's life was clear to everyone who knew him. The man who once rushed through meetings and brushed off greetings now took time to listen, to understand, to connect. He had stopped being just a businessman. He had become a leader people actually respected. One morning, as sunlight spilled across his office desk, Ethan sat looking at an old photo from his school days. It was a class picture, edges faded and corners bent. In the middle stood a younger version of himself, confident, bold, a little too proud even then. Next to him was a girl with a quiet smile and a notebook in hand. It took him a second to recognize her. Clara. He smiled faintly, remembering those days, how he used to rush through life, always trying to be noticed while she had quietly worked, never needing attention to shine. It amazed him how time had brought them together again in such an unexpected way. Just then his assistant knocked on the door. "Sir, Clara's here to see you." Ethan looked up with surprise. "She's early. Send her in." A moment later, Clara stepped into the room, dressed simply but gracefully as always. She carried a folder under her arm and a warm, calm expression on her face. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he replied with a genuine smile. "You're always ahead of schedule." "I like to make time for conversation," she said lightly. "It's where the best ideas come from." They both laughed softly as she took a seat. They spent the first part of the meeting reviewing reports. The project was performing even better than expected. Sales were up, feedback was positive, and the partnership had inspired other companies to take a more people-centered approach. When the business talk was done, Clara closed the folder and said, "You've built something good here, Ethan. Not just a company, but a place people want to belong to." He smiled. "I had a good teacher." Clara shook her head slightly. "You already had it in you. You just needed to remember who you were before the world told you what success should look like." Her words hit him deeply. He looked out the window for a moment, watching the city move below. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think that money could buy anything. But the truth is it can't buy peace. It can't buy respect. Those things have to be earned." Clara nodded. "Exactly. The real reward of success is how you treat people when you finally have it." He turned to her and said softly, "You reminded me of that." For a while, neither of them spoke. There was no need. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, full of understanding. After a moment, Clara reached into her folder and handed him an envelope. "This is from the board," she said. "It's an invitation to speak at our annual leadership conference next month." He looked surprised. "Me," she smiled. "Yes. They want you to share your story, your journey, your lessons, your perspective. You've become an example of what true leadership looks like." Ethan blinked, genuinely moved. "I don't know what to say. Just be honest," she said. "That's what people need to hear." He nodded slowly, holding the envelope carefully. "I'll do it." She stood, smoothing her jacket. "Good, and one more thing, it's not about perfection. It's about growth." "People will connect to that," Ethan smiled. "I'll remember." As Clara turned to leave, he said, "Clara?" She paused, glancing back. "Thank you, not just for the partnership, but for believing I could change." She smiled warmly. "You didn't need me to believe it, Ethan. You just needed to believe it yourself." And with that, she left. That evening, after the office quieted down, Ethan stayed behind. The city outside glowed in soft gold and blue, lights shimmering like distant stars. He opened the envelope again, reading the invitation carefully. It didn't just feel like a chance to speak. It felt like a moment to come full circle. The following month, the conference hall was filled with hundreds of professionals, entrepreneurs, managers, and young dreamers looking for guidance. Ethan sat backstage, nerves running through him like small waves. It had been years since he'd felt this nervous, but it wasn't the kind that came from fear. It was the kind that came from caring. Clara found him before he went on. "You'll do fine," she said softly. He smiled. "You'll be in the audience?" "Front row," she said. He nodded. "Then I'll make sure to speak from the heart." When his name was announced, applause filled the room. He walked onto the stage slowly, taking in the faces, eager, curious, expectant. He took a deep breath and began. "Good afternoon, everyone. A few years ago, if someone told me I'd be standing here talking about leadership, I would have laughed. Not because I didn't believe in leadership, but because I thought I already knew everything about it." A light chuckle moved through the crowd. "I used to believe success was about money, power, and recognition. I thought the higher you climbed, the more respect you earned. But I was wrong. Respect doesn't come from position, it comes from character." He paused, looking around the room. "Not long ago, I made a mistake. I looked at someone and judged them by their job, not their worth. I forgot that every person, whether they're serving tables, cleaning floors, or signing contracts, deserves the same respect. And that moment changed me forever." The room was completely silent now. He continued. "That person taught me something I'll never forget. That success without kindness is failure in disguise. Because one day the world stops clapping, the money stops impressing, and all that's left is the kind of person you've become." He looked toward the front row where Clara sat quietly, her eyes steady and proud. "I learned that the true measure of success isn't how high you climb, but how you lift others along the way. The people who build you up, who challenge you, who remind you to stay human, they are the real foundation of success." He took a deep breath, emotion in his voice. "So, to anyone here chasing a dream, chase it hard, but don't lose your heart in the process. Because at the end of it all, your name, your title, your money, none of that will matter if you forget how to treat people with kindness." When he finished, the crowd erupted into applause, not loud or wild, but warm and genuine. It wasn't the applause of admiration. It was the applause of understanding. Ethan stepped off the stage, heart full and eyes slightly wet. Clara met him backstage, smiling softly. "That was beautiful," she said. "You spoke like someone who's lived every word." He smiled back. "I did." For the rest of the evening, people approached him, some to shake his hand, some to share their own stories, some just to say thank you. For once, he didn't feel like the richest man in the room. He felt like the most grateful. A few weeks later, he received a letter from one of his employees. It was handwritten, a little uneven but filled with emotion. It read, "Thank you for creating a place where people like me feel seen. I used to think my job didn't matter. Now I feel like I'm part of something important." He read it twice, smiling quietly. Then he pinned it to his office wall, right above the old class photo. That letter reminded him every day why he did what he did. Months turned into a year, and the company continued to grow, not just in profit, but in purpose. People wanted to work there, not because of the name, but because of the environment. Clara remained involved as a trusted partner, visiting often, still grounded, still humble, still the same person who had changed everything with her quiet strength. One evening, as they walked out of a meeting together, the sun was setting, painting the sky in soft orange and gold. They stopped by the window, watching the light fade. Ethan said softly, "You know, sometimes I think about how that night could have gone differently. If you hadn't spoken up, if you'd just walked away." Clara smiled gently. "I would have if I thought it would teach you nothing. But I saw something in you worth saving." He looked at her, eyes warm. "You did save me, from becoming someone I wouldn't have recognized one day." She laughed lightly. "No, you saved yourself. I just held up a mirror." They stood there quietly, watching the last light fade into night. "Do you ever miss the simple days?" he asked suddenly. "Before the titles, the meetings, the pressure?" Clara thought for a moment. "Sometimes. But then I remember, we're not meant to go back. We're meant to carry what we've learned forward." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's true." They stood there a little longer before she said, "Well, I should get going." "Big day tomorrow," he smiled. "Always." As she walked away, Ethan stayed by the window looking at the city below, alive, bright, full of stories. He thought about how strange and beautiful life was, how one moment of pride could lead to a lifetime of wisdom. How one person could change another's direction without even trying. He turned off the lights, locked his office, and stepped outside. The air was cool, the city humming softly around him. He walked down the street, not as the man chasing success, but as someone finally at peace with who he was. Somewhere deep inside, he knew this wasn't the end of his story, just the beginning of a better one. And as he looked up at the sky, filled with faint stars and city light, he whispered quietly to himself, "Stay humble. Stay human." Then he smiled, the kind of smile that only comes from finally understanding what truly matters.